Florida could redraw the congressional map and shift the balance of power.
Florida has gone very red during my tenure as governor.
The governor says it's long overdue.
And we have every right to be able to do new districts.
His critics call it a power grab.
Once again, you have folks who have to cheat to win.
And it could set off the next flashpoint in a battle across the nation as government watchdogs say gerrymandering is rigging the game.
It really raises a lot of red flags.
I'm Craig Patrick, and for the next half hour, we'll explain how some maps are drawn to lock in power, how it's warping our politics and fueling America's deepening divide, and how census errors may have cost Florida. Plus, Dr. Susan McManus will join us to explain what this fight says about trust in government. All in this edition of Money, Power, and Politics. We're living in an age of fierce division when politicians berate one another. They play to the fringes and stoke anger and fear of the other side. And as it keeps escalating, social media algorithms reward it by amplifying it and fanning the flames.
It's almost an immediate step towards demonizing the other side. They're not just wrong on this issue, they're evil.
But polling from the Reagan Presidential Foundation shows most Americans do not want this. They want to restore the kind of civility we had when Reagan was president, when Ronald Reagan and his rival Tip O'Neill had sharp differences on policy, but they came together as friends.
And Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful you have permitted me in the past, and I hope in the future, that singular honor, the honor of calling you my friend.
They disagreed on the issues, but they valued compromise and civility and saved Social Security in a bipartisan way.
I think the fact of our friendship is testimony to the political system that we're part of and the country we live in. A country which permits two not so shy and not so retiring Irishmen to have it out on the issues rather than on each other or their countrymen.
The parties were also more balanced back then because Republicans had a moderate wing in the Northeast and in California, and Democrats had a conservative wing in the South, and that helped moderate the parties in our politics. But then conservative or moderate Democrats like Phil Gramm, Bob Martinez, and Richard Shelby left the Democrats in the South, and liberal or moderate Republicans like Arlen Specter, Lowell Weicker, and Elizabeth Warren left the Republicans to the north. And with that, both parties lost one wing and pulled to the left and pulled to the right. And as that happened, each party also began to dominate different parts of the country. And that gave each party more power and zeal to redraw the political maps to favor themselves. It's called gerrymandering, named after Elbridge Gerry. More than 200 years ago, he redrew the political districts of Massachusetts to make it easier for his friends to win. And one of the districts was so squirmy and rigged, critics said that it looked like a salamander, and they mockingly called it a gerrymander. And then the pronunciation later morphed over time into gerrymander. It's an old political trick that both parties took to a whole new level the past 40 years.
If you look at D.C., if you were someone who was trying to bring the party to the middle, you're an endangered species.
And now a lot of districts are packed with one party's voters and the other side is cut out. And so candidates know the path to getting elected is to run either hard left or hard right and to vilify the other side to avoid getting primaried. Now combine that with the Supreme Court ruling that allows special interests to spend unlimited money smearing one side or the other, and politicians who spend more and more time raising money than getting to know one another in Washington. And then combine that with algorithms that flood people with stuff that makes them angry and reinforces their pre-existing beliefs. Well, this is what you get.
I don't respect these MAGA Republicans.
These are people that hate our country.
They're a threat to our very democracy.
They hate it, I think, with a passion.
Now, there are some ways we could try to address this. For example, we could scale back closed primaries in which only registered Republicans and only registered Democrats can vote for their own party's nominees. And we could expand open primaries in which nonpartisan voters can vote in them as well. We could also increase competition from third parties with ranked choice voting. That means that voters get to pick their first and their second choice candidates. So if the first choice loses and no one has a majority, the second choice gets their vote. And of course, we could expand the use of independent commissions to draw the districts instead of the politicians. But the politicians in power are going the other way and doubling down.
And we are entitled to 5 more seats.
Yeah, President Trump claims he's entitled to more safe Republican U.S. House seats in Texas because he won Texas with 56% of the vote. For context, Republicans happen to have a slim U.S. House majority. Trump's approval rating is underwater, and the president's party tends to lose seats in midterm elections anyway. Trump pushed Texas to add 5 Republican-leaning seats while he's trying to hold on to a majority of seats in Congress, and both parties know it.
The idea that the President of the United States says he's entitled to 5 seats should sicken everybody.
California's Democratic governor retaliated with plans to wash out the 5 new Republican districts in Texas with 5 new Democratic districts in California, and that ignited the partisan arms race we have today. Republican politicians in other states like Florida are now pushing to change their maps as well, and Democrats are crying foul.
It is a clear maneuver to secure Republican dominance in Congress for generations to come. And it's unconstitutional.
On Texas, the Republicans said their motivation in changing the map was to increase their party's advantage, and they cited a 2019 Supreme Court ruling which allows it.
Supreme Court says we can use political and partisanship to do congressional redistricting.
The situation in Florida is a little different because we have a state amendment called Fair Districts, and it states that districts should be contiguous, compact, and use existing geographic boundaries wherever possible, and it bans changing the map to favor any particular party or candidate. But that can be hard to enforce as long as you don't overtly say that you're changing the map to help your party.
What Florida Republicans are probably going to try to do is avoid saying things that would be so blatant that this Supreme Court would say that they went too far.
In 2022, the governor increased the Republicans' advantage by stretching Kathy Castor's heavily Democratic district in Tampa across the bay, absorbing more Democrats from St. Petersburg. And see, that concentrated more Democrats into this already heavily Democratic district in Hillsborough, making the one in Pinellas more favorable for Republicans, which Republican Ana Paulina Luna then won. Well, the Fair Districts Amendment didn't stop that change. And it also did not stop the governor from erasing this district you see in North Florida. It was drawn to combine what are called communities of interest, which means it was drawn to increase the minority population within the district, which is intended to increase minority representation in Congress. The Fair Districts Amendment in Florida preserves communities of interest. They also have protections under federal law, but the governor still nixed that one in 2022 and won a state court challenge over it.
Sacrifices Black representation on the altar of the governor's political ambition.
The governor is now raising concerns about another minority access or communities of interest district in South Florida, while a pending U.S. Supreme Court case could remove the federal protections for these districts. And this is how the governor could revise the map in Florida to expand Republicans' advantage without saying that that's his motivation. DeSantis says he wants to change districts due to our growing population, and he'd also like the federal government to do an unscheduled census that could give Florida an extra seat or 2.
Just look at how population has shifted in different parts of the state over a 4 or 5 year period. It's been really significant.
That's the backstory of gerrymandering and how it sharpened the political divide and what to expect in Florida and beyond as the political arms race heats up.
This is a really big arms race about the future of where we're going.
Texas is now more red in the United States Congress.
We're doing this only in response to what he's doing.
We're going to be looking at the pathways to be able to do the redistricting here in Florida.
They're trying to change the rules of the game midstream. That's not fair. That's not right.
This is a new Democratic Party. We're bringing a knife to a knife fight, and we are going to fight fire with fire.
Well, please welcome Dr. Susan McManus, University of South Florida, Distinguished Professor Emeritus. Great to have you with us once more.
Thank you.
Let's start with the state of our politics. One of John McCain's closing speeches was a call for humility, for compromise, for trusting in one another yet again.
I hope we can again rely on humility, on our need to cooperate, on our dependence on each other, to learn how to trust each other again, and by so doing better, serve the people who elected us. Stop listening to the bombastic loudmouths on the radio and television and the internet.
Has that train totally and permanently left the station?
Well, unfortunately, it looks like that. Trust levels are at the very lowest level they've been in years, but particularly troubling, people are starting to lose confidence in not just federal employees, but going all the way down to local. It's affecting how people act in the world of politics. It's very troubling to a lot of people that people can't be civil to one another. Gone are the days when compromise was a good word, as you were suggesting and McCain suggested. But yet the great compromise was what put this nation together to begin with.
Yet our framers, Madison in particular, feared that hostility and factions could tear us apart. But he looked at that and said, gee, the nation's so big, the size alone would be a firewall. I think he wrote in Federalist 10 that we don't have to worry about it that much. He did not foresee this age of machines and algorithms that fuel the flames so far and so fast.
Absolutely not. But on the other hand, a lot of people are still hopeful. A lot of people still are determined that their vote is important and matters, and that's a good thing.
However, in the age of gerrymandering, we have more and more districts in which only, in most cases, one party can win because so many voters from that particular party are crammed into it. And now we have this call for more redistricting. First, before we even get into the political implications, if there is a census at this point in the game, how reliable or accurate can it be?
I don't foresee, even if we had a mid-decade census, that it would be done in time for the elections to take place in 2026. After all, in Florida, the filing deadline is July for a lot of candidates.
And yet we have a push in Texas to redraw lines.
Right.
California saying if they do, we'll do it too. Maybe Florida's in the mix, other states as well, in which case you would have conceivably more districts drawn to favor one party or another, so you pretty much know the outcome, and it's far more likely to elect people on the far left and the far right.
And that's long been a complaint. But if you look at Florida's talking about it, and of course the argument here is, well, a lot more Republicans have moved into the state since just 5 years ago that, you know, redrawing things would be more in line with our politics. That's one speculation. Another is that it's just to lock out the other side. There hasn't been any polling done on this plan to do this in Florida, but previous polls have shown that people don't really like this look of doing this just for politics, but more and basically. At a time when people are struggling financially, every poll shows that pocketbook issues are near the top of the list. When they look at these people fleeing one state to go camp out in another, and another state, well, we can do this to counter that, it's not giving a lot more trust on the part of the citizens to government when they see what seems to be, to many, just a sheer power grab.
Well, cultural flashpoints rule the day in politics these days, but you're saying with so many people concerned and strained with their finances, will that lead to a scenario in the race for governor in Florida where insurance rates, inflation, other issues will pull focus, or will it be focused more on the culture war issues?
Guaranteed it's going to be focused more on the economic issues. Now, there is a wild card in all of this, and that's some kind of foreign policy or international episode. And what we see in politics these days is with a snap of a finger, what you were convinced was going to happen, something else suddenly takes the stage, but then in another couple of weeks it goes by the way. It's very hard for people to campaign or figure out their strategy for messaging and how they're going to campaign to people when, with the snap of a finger, what they're counting on really pushing as their number one issue is suddenly not relevant. So things change so fast in the world of politics, it's like a whirlwind, that it makes it difficult for people to get up. Now, the other problem we're seeing is a tremendous drop in people's attentiveness to political news. And that's a consequence of everything seems always negative, always polarized, one-sided. All of this is feeding in together so that next year's midterm elections, we're going to be watching for a lot of things. But number one thing we're going to look at long term is, have we started to repair the damage that's been done to our politics by this negativism, lack of civility, power grabs, all the things that people don't like at the time that they're suffering financially.
Dr. Susan McManus, thank you as always for your insight.
Thank you.
Well, check out the Fox Local app for extended interviews and perspective on the loss of civility, redistricting, and the issues. Look for the section called Money, Power, and Politics. We're closing this episode with a closer look at how all of this relates to the U.S. Census. Basically, the population of each state is supposed to determine how many seats each state gets in Congress, and Governor DeSantis claims Florida got cheated.
We got shortchanged in the last census. We should have had 2 or 3 seats. We only got 1 seat, and that was really the Biden administration's doing.
Well, first, the last census was conducted in 2020 under President Trump, not Biden. The Biden administration completed the reapportionment data, which DeSantis somehow suggests or insinuates Biden mishandled. We'll dig into that point in a moment. But let's start with the assertion that Florida got hosed in the 2020 census conducted by the Trump administration.
Even Biden's administration a couple years after acknowledged Florida got shortchanged.
Well, that is true. The Biden administration did conclude the 2020 census undercounted the people living in Florida. See, the Commerce Department does what's called a post-enumeration survey to basically audit the results of the census. And this time, like many times before, they found errors.
The census is never an accurate count because people are being born and people are dying as they're counting it. There's also an undercount. So the federal government says this is the official count.
And before the Biden Commerce Department weighed in, the Urban Institute also raised concerns about the 2020 census. The Urban Institute model found an undercount that was particularly off in Florida. It projected an average undercount all across the nation of 0.5% and nearly twice that, nearly a full point off in Florida. And then the Biden Commerce Department's analysis found it was off by much more than that. In fact, it projected an undercount of nearly 3.5%.
So you have some districts that have not reflected the population change.
And that certainly can shortchange Florida because the census counts determine not just how many U.S. lawmakers represent each state, it also determines how much federal money each state and community gets. And the post-census projections suggest Florida is losing millions of dollars in Medicaid funds and federal highway funds, education funds, temporary assistance for needy families, and much, much more than that.
Programs such as school lunches, unemployment insurance, emergency management services, and hospitals have their budgets determined in many ways based on the census count.
And to the governor's point, projections suggest Florida should have gained at least 2 additional seats in Congress instead of the 1 additional seat it was given. And the Biden administration and Republicans acknowledged that in 2021.
You would have thought Florida would get 2. Now, from initial report, it could be within less than 100 of why they missed off on that, and you thought Texas would get 3. They both got 1 less. You thought New York would lose an extra, and they did not.
Well, the census appears to have undercounted people in general and more so in Florida and a handful of other states for several reasons.
2020 brought unprecedented challenges: a global pandemic, destructive wildfires, the most active hurricane season on record.
Well, the Census Bureau sent out letters urging people to fill out the survey online or mail back the printed form in March of 2020. March of 2020. And they sent out the letters the same time the pandemic hit and shut down the nation and surely pulled focus from everything else. Plus, there was a shortage of paper census forms in 2020 because it was the first census designed to be conducted mainly online, and COVID-19 made it harder for many to access online computers. And again, all of that was widely discussed and acknowledged at the time.
There are enormous amounts of societal reasons where communication gaps were present, where folks who needed to be counted the most were missed.
And Trump's appointed census managers ceased counting efforts weeks earlier than planned, And the Bureau's own analysis warned that that could cut processing time and could lead to serious errors. And on top of that, the Constitution requires counts based on total people living in an area, not just citizens.
Whether documented, undocumented, a resident, a citizen, a prisoner, it doesn't matter.
And that's because the U.S. Constitution requires every person to be counted, and courts have interpreted that to mean citizens and non-citizens alike because our laws affect everyone. And in 2020, President Trump's failed push for a citizenship question on the census may have chilled response from illegal immigrants. And by estimates, illegal immigrants disproportionately live along the Sun Belt. So there are several reasons for an undercount in a state like Florida, which again does appear to have cost Florida at least one U.S. House seat.
Award us another seat. That would obviously trigger us have to do a new map.
But that's not typically how it works. The Trump administration's 2020 census did face deep challenges. And yes, the Biden administration found errors with it, but said it cannot retroactively change the results, as flawed as they may be. And that is a long-standing policy based on a long-running interpretation of the law. See, through history, one state or another has been shortchanged along the way, and they've had to wait it out until the next 10-year census.
So the federal government says this is the official count. Hard cheese if you lost or gained people, and those are the numbers we're going to play with.
And the post-enumeration surveys find these errors because they're intended for future improvement, not to revise congressional apportionment in the middle of a decade between one census and another. But having said that, Trump is breaking a lot of political norms, and he and Congress could break yet another by ordering a new census. And that could heighten tensions and shake up Florida's political map and others across the nation before the midterm elections.